Have you ever felt that, that kind of quiet emptiness, a sense that something's missing, even when your life is jam-packed with stuff to do? Well, let's dive into that. Today, we're going to explore this really deep spiritual need that our modern world, well, it might just be distracting us from. And we'll look at what the source material has to say about it. So this invitation, this is really the starting point for the whole conversation. It paints a picture of spirituality not as some chore, but as quenching a really deep, fundamental thirst. The idea here is that we're supposed to feel thirsty, recognize it, and then go to the one source that can actually satisfy that thirst. And here's the big question, the paradox that a lot of us face. We might feel unfulfilled, sure, but we don't necessarily feel that specific thirst for God. So what gives? Why is it that this invitation sometimes just doesn't land, even when, deep down, we might need it the most?
Well, the source material offers up this really powerful concept to explain it: spiritual malnourishment. Think of it this way. You can eat a bunch of junk food, and your stomach will feel totally full, right? You're not hungry. But your body, it's actually starving for real nutrients. The text suggests the exact same thing can happen to our spirits.
This quote just nails it. It's the central metaphor, the core idea. This junk food stands for all the distractions, all the little things we use to fill up that inner void, a void that, according to the text, only God was meant to fill.
So let's break this down. On one side, you have what the source calls spiritual junk food. Mindless scrolling, numbing hobbies, just worldly distractions. And on the other side, you've got spiritual nutrition, things like intentional prayer, self-denial, and actively seeking God. The argument is pretty simple. You can't really develop an appetite for the good stuff if you're constantly full of the junk. But the source gets even more specific. It's not just talking about distractions in general. No, it points to a very, very powerful modern form of this spiritual junk food, something most of us are holding in our hands, probably right now. Okay, so get this. The text describes this incredibly vivid vision. It starts with a woman just picking up her phone, a totally normal, everyday thing to do. But what happens next is anything but normal, and it serves as this huge warning. So as the vision plays out, her phone doesn't open to her home screen or an app. Nope, the screen literally transforms into an ancient temple, a place for idol worship. A giant statue of an idol pops up, and then it just shatters into a million tiny little pieces all over her screen. And the scariest part? She's stuck. She's tapping the screen, trying to get out, but she's trapped inside this digital temple. And all she can say over and over again is, so many idols, so many idols. It shows she knows she's caught in a snare, just completely overwhelmed by it all.
So what does this all mean? Well, the interpretation given in the source is that our phones have become these modern gateways to a really ancient problem, idolatry. That one big idol shattering into countless pieces, that symbolizes all the different apps, the notifications, the endless streams of content that are constantly grabbing for our attention and, in a way, demanding our worship.
And the effects of this, according to the text, are pretty severe. It argues that this modern idolatry just numbs our spirit. It makes our prayer life wither away. And that sense of awe or fear of the Lord starts to fade. Our source of satisfaction shifts from God to our phones. And that ultimately makes us, as the source puts it, ineffective in our spiritual lives. Okay, so that is a heavy diagnosis of the problem, for sure. But the good news is, the text doesn't just leave us there. It pivots to a solution. And the logic is actually pretty straightforward. If the problem is being too full of spiritual junk, the solution has to be emptying ourselves out to make room for what really matters.
And this right here is the foundation for the whole solution. The very first step isn't about adding more stuff, like more prayer or more Bible study. According to the text, it's actually an act of subtraction. It all starts with self-denial, making a conscious choice to say no to the things that we know numb our spirits.
So what does that actually look like? Well, the source lays out a three-step process. First, you deny yourself the junk. You cut out the distractions. Second, you persist in prayer, even when, and this is key, especially when you don't feel like it. The text really emphasizes that the feeling often comes after the action, not before. And the whole point of these two steps is to create a kind of spiritual vacuum, an empty space, so that God has room to move in and fill that void.
Now let's be real. The source is very clear that this is not going to be easy. It's actually described as sowing in tears.
Turning away from our usual comforts and distractions can be genuinely painful at first. But the promise here is that if you stick with it, that difficult work will eventually lead to a harvest of real joy and true fulfillment. And to show just how powerful persistence can be, the text points to the story of the disciples. They prayed for 10 straight days after Jesus ascended, just waiting. And it was after that period of persistent prayer that the Holy Spirit came. It's just a powerful reminder that breakthrough often comes after consistent, dedicated effort.
This verse from Galatians really sums up the whole principle. Our spiritual life works on a law of sowing and reaping. It's simple, really. According to the text, whatever you invest your time and attention in, that's what's going to grow. You're going to get a harvest that matches what you planted. So really, the source presents us with two paths. On one path, you sow into worldly distractions. You invest your energy there. The result? A heart that's pretty content with the world, a heart that feels no spiritual hunger. But on the other path, you invest in seeking God, and the harvest there is that very hunger, which then leads to real fulfillment.
Okay, this is actually pretty fascinating. This source gives some historical context for that famous biblical metaphor about losing your saltiness. Back in the day, the salt they used wasn't pure like our table salt. It was mixed with other minerals, and if you left it out and it got red, the actual salt could wash away, leaving behind this useless, flavorless powder that was only good for being thrown on paths.
And that right there is the spiritual danger that the text is warning us about. When we get too mixed up, too blended with all the worldly distractions and idols, we risk losing our saltiness, our spiritual impact, our effectiveness. We might still look the part on the outside, but we lose the very thing that the source says makes us spiritually useful.
So, we end with this final, very personal question from the book of Revelation. The source makes it crystal clear that Jesus doesn't force his way in. He stands at the door of our heart, and he knocks. So creating that spiritual hunger by denying ourselves and praying. It's not about earning his entry. It's about clearing out all the noise and junk so we can finally hear that knock and have the clarity to get up and open the door. At the end of the day, the choice is ours.